Hello and welcome to the Real Talk with the Unicorn. My name is Tatiana. I'm a recruiter in supply chain and logistics. Today is our episode number 18. And we will talk about supply chain, latest trends in supply chain. And I'm very passionate to invite guests who will demonstrate their character and their achievements in supply chain. And of course, that you, my audience, can learn from them. I'm very excited to introduce Jit Hinchman, the owner and the president of Supply Chain Advisor. Jit is very passionate about expanding her knowledge in supply chain, has over 10 years of experience, hands-on experience. And what I really loved about Jit is that she's very passionate and she advocates for sustainable supply chain and looks forward with new ideas. And of course, Jit is a women entrepreneur, and I'm also learning to learn certain things from her as well. And my other guest who's joining us from Ireland, Steve O'Sullivan. Steve is an excellent supply chain consultant with experience, with passion for supply chain. Steve is also a PhD researcher and a tennis director. So Steve, Jit, welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have the conversation. I'm sure it will be meaningful for all of us and for our audience.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tatiana.
I forgot to mention that Jit is joining us from Indianapolis. So yes, we have an international team today, and I'm from Canada. So let's see how our countries are going through COVID and how our supply chains are dealing with it. So my very first question to you, and I want to hear both perspectives. COVID-19, no doubt, affected all supply chains, all aspects. I want to understand which areas of supply chain were affected the most, areas where companies are facing major transformations. Do you have that observation based on your experience, Jit?
Okay, so to clarify with the audiences, when we talk about supply chain in general, you mean that supply chain as a part, right? If the part of the business, I would say it's the logistic part that have affected the most. Why? The reason is that because most of the time the logistic is the part that moving things, that moving the products to, from place to place, from the warehouse to the customer, or from the factory to, those kind of things. So when the lockdown and the pandemic hit, it's pretty much put everyone on freeze, right? And even though the supply chain management, the theory and the practice is still the same way, but regulation and all of that is certainly put the pressure on the business. So I would say when it looks industry, like the whole industry, I would think that logistics and the transportation is the one being forced out to stay still, although it have some requirement that they can do that because it's considered essential work. But still, some people may have, concern about the virus and all that and their safety and all that. I would think that that's part of it. But when it look into the operation point of view, I would think no one ever taught us how to, have the 6 feet apart to work or to move the pallets and all that. And I think that part is certainly affect, the people and the leadership, how to, and also still keep the customers' demand fulfilled. So I think that part is certainly affect. And of course, this global pandemic is certainly happened at a global level. And, it's just freeze both sides, both demand and the supply. So for me, it certainly forced us to be more innovative and more creative, I think. What about you, Steve?
Yes, Steve.
Well, yeah, all fantastic points, Jit. Another perspective would be none. And I think that's not a great answer when we have an hour of conversation ahead of us. But for me, public perception and awareness was a big part of COVID-19. So, and I think it went from a negative to, I would hope, a positive. So supply chain management moved really from the invisible profession to suddenly now being a major topic across social media and news channels, and then arising from the panicked actions of a lady in Australia. There suddenly wasn't a toilet roll to be found anywhere on the planet. And commentators then were proudly mentioning JIT as if they knew what it was. And I think we also have the perfect storm going on with with Brexit and the Ever Given wedged in the Suez Canal. But I think COVID-19 has highlighted the very fact that this lack of supply chain management awareness leads to disruption, because it is the same inside organizations. And it's rare to find a seat for supply chain management at the top table. And decisions are made without their consultation, and this causes preventable problems. So the standout features of COVID-19 are its scale. Obviously, it's the largest disruption we've ever encountered in our lifetimes, and the fact that it's an excursion disruption over a prolonged period. But the reality is that since the beginning of the age of globalization as we know it in the 1990s, disruption of this nature has been a constant. And I think COVID-19 has proven in a strong sense our vulnerability to this globalization and indeed to lean practices. And prior to this, the greatest disruption in modern history was the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, and that caused $217 billion worth in economic losses. So it's nothing new, it's just the scale. In fact, as far back as 1998, Richard Wilding of Cranfield was discussing demand amplification, abnormal behaviors, and chaos in response to sudden crisis in his supply chain complexity triangle. And Sheffy in 2001 of MIT said that the accumulating costs and other negative consequences are more severe than the crisis due to the disproportionate effect on demand through panic. So we're talking about this for decades. So it seems to me that there's a misalignment between academia and practice. Mm-hmm. But I think there have been positives though, because supply chain management has demonstrated great responsiveness, agility, flexibility, and powers of reconstruction. Thankfully, we were quickly falling over pallets of toilet rolls in our supermarkets fairly quickly. And in reference to the Suez Canal, despite the fact that every year, on average, 370 merchant ships are lost at sea, and separate to this, 600 to 700 individual containers fall off container ships, supply chain management always prevails to meet consumer demand. So I think the lack of awareness of supply chain created the panic amongst the public. But this awareness now hopefully will negate that type of panic going forward. I think people are now recognizing and appreciating the real importance of logisticians and truckers, etc. Yeah. And there's also been a generally good demonstration of collective mindfulness as well, a collective approach by everybody to COVID-19. I hate mentioning my book, but I did mention
I forgot to introduce the book, Supply Chain Disruption.
I did mention a Prussian general, Karl von Clausewitz, in 1932, and he talked about a trinity of government policy, strategic implementation, which in his case was the military during war times, and then citizen reaction. And when they are perfectly aligned, we have success. And we saw that COVID numbers started coming down when everyone worked together. And as soon as fractions rebelled against restrictions, we had second and third waves. So I think COVID has played out that trinity, and it showed the importance of collective mindfulness. So overall, I would say it's nothing new. It's just a huge, a much larger scale than we've experienced before. But we can now see that hopefully with public awareness and education, that there will be less impact going forward in similar situations.
Yes, Steve, I agree with you. And so to summarize what you just said, as supply chain became more visible in terms of people see value in having a decent and resilient supply chain. I know you're a big advocate for resiliency in
Yeah.
supply chain. It is also a crisis of a relatively long stretch within the time. So the disruptions that you mentioned, they did not last for almost a year and a half or 2 years. So that's also affected human mindset and how we all handle stress, and collectively that we were able to collaborate and unite. That's a huge achievement. It means we are ready to face similar disruptions in the future. Hopefully we will have a little break between the disruptions. Steve, Jit, I know that you deal with multiple clients in various industries. You work together. How do you know that supply chain that you are assessing is resilient? How do you know that supply chain is ready for the potential disruption? Are there any characteristics of it? If you can share it with us, please, because I know that managers are watching this interview and they want to understand, is my supply chain resilient? Am I ready? How do I know it is resilient? So that would be interesting to hear.
Oh, would you like to take on that first, Steve? Because he's pretty much expert on that. I will take it at the end if you don't mind, Steve.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, I guess, because the concept of supply chain resilience, I don't believe that it works. Okay, so let me um, let me take you back just a little bit. Supply chain resilience deals with sudden, unplannable events. Okay, and it really just started back in 2000, 2001 in the UK in response to fuel protests and foot and mouth disease, and later expanded in MIT following 9/11. And the concept itself was coined in 2003 by Rice and Canyato. It is my favorite area of research, but there are a number of reasons why it hasn't really worked as a concept. First of all, it's a form of insurance, a trade-off between the cost of just in case and the lean nature of just in time. And that creates a tension between efficiency and effectiveness. This has not been resolved. And also lean is the enemy of resilience. And then when you consider the hierarchy of the concept itself, you've got operations management, and then you've got supply chain management coming under that as a sub-discipline. Under that, as a subdomain, you've got supply chain risk management, and then buried underneath that, you've got the concept of resilience. And it's almost like you have a John or Mary sitting in the corner dealing with supply chain resilience, but nobody wants to interact with them because that interferes with the real business of making profits, which is a false economy, of course, you know. So, and I think as well in terms of research, very little has been, you know, advanced in the area of small to medium-sized enterprises, you know, which is unfortunate because in the UK alone, 99% of companies are SMEs. So, you know, there is another type of organization which I have been working with, which is high reliability organizations, which I will come to a little bit later. But if you, and they have managed to balance that tension between efficiency and effectiveness. But when we talk about the technicalities of supply chain resilience, you've got a phased approach. You've got preparation, you've got response, and you've got recovery. And some brilliant minds have, you know, such as Kirsten Scholten, have added mitigation, which they say is the most important phase. It builds a foundation, and I agree with that. But in my research, I found that mitigation is a one-off phase and not repeated again throughout the life cycle. And I do not agree with the linear representation of the phases, you know, such as, you know, we go from preparation to reconstruction. It sounds as if we've solved the disruption. We can go back to our normal business. But resilience is an ongoing accomplishment. It's cyclical. It must be continuous. So I would suggest that preparation and response more or less go hand in hand in a very cyclical, ongoing way. And the reconstruction or recovery is built into the response. So there's a growth element within that. So you have various different elements as well. I mean, across all the phases, I think there's about 13 to 14 different elements that are required to have resilience within your organization. You've got, situational awareness, knowledge management, agility, flexibility. All of these elements are important. But I think there's, the one thing about the concept is that there's no, no cohesion within the concept. There's nothing that we can apply to businesses and say, this is your toolkit to achieve a resilient supply chain. But when we talk about trends in supply chain, I can talk a bit more about my solution or my proposed solution to that problem. So Jit, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my take on it, Jim, just sorry for interrupting, is that resilience is like a muscle of a supply chain. You just can't stop exercising, right? You need to maintain resilience as your ongoing component.
Yes, you do. And you need a collective approach to it as well. So it's almost like we shouldn't be calling it supply chain resilience. We shouldn't be calling it supply chain disruption. We should be simply saying resilience and disruption, because oftentimes it's not supply chain that causes the disruption. And oftentimes we need a collective response cross functions to resolve it as well, and I think that's the issue really, that I talked about the collective mindfulness when we dealt with COVID. We also need to have that approach to our organizations, and not to segregate it into silos where only one faction within the organization is dealing with this, so it has to be holistic, collective approach to it. I talked again in my book about a misalignment between business strategy and supply chain tactics. There has to be this alignment, and it has to be ongoing. And the one thing as well is that we need to be afraid of success, because success breeds complacency. We should almost be celebrating minor failures rather than the successes, because we need to be constantly vigilant to what can come next. So with the current representation, the linear representation, we prepare for something, we respond, we reconstruct, and then we go back to normal behaviors. And because we relax and there's not a holistic approach to what could happen next, then we are going to be faced with another disruption. And that is the issue. A lot of this has been discussed within the academic world for 20 years, but it hasn't been applied. Disruptions continue and continue and continue. And that's something that we need to get out of. And I think COVID-19 is a perfect example of why and how we should do that.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Jit, what is your perspective on the resilience and how one knows that his or her supply chain is resilient?
I think it is a very good question. It only means that they care, that they want to fulfill that customer and ability to, moving forward. For me, if you look at in terms of measurement, if you can see that, your ability to anticipate, to respond, to learn from it, and to adapt and to recover, that means that you have ability to be resilient at some point. Maybe not, fully cover all the area, but at least you have the main area that you certainly don't want to miss it out. Now, when it translates in terms of operation, what that it means to you, it means that do you have the product available when the customer need it, and you have the financial and capital that would help you to recover. to invest in the area that you need to move forward. For me, it's not just the materialistic. And I think that Steve and I have this conversation that we believe that supply chain is a living mechanism. It's always adapt. It's always the key and the heart of it is people. So you cannot just put everything into the business, because the business consists of people. And for me, if your people cannot be resilient, cannot be safe, cannot be feel comfortable enough and transparent and trust each other, your supply chain would not be resilient enough. And you cannot just take just like Steve said, it needs to be the whole ecosystem, the holistic approach, because you cannot be resilient if your supplier is out of business. So it's not the time that you're just looking for yourself. You need to look after other people as well. That your success depends on other people's success as well. And of course, you need to focus on the customer, and you need to get rid of the silo. Hey, I need to work for my boss, because everybody's work for customer. Without customer, we will not be able to survive. So for me, whoever have that question in mind, I praise their passion and their dedicate into their profession, because they certainly care and they want to do the good job. I think if you have the inventory on hand and enough to supply the demand that the customer, especially during this time, that people certainly for their safety and even just simple food item. We are doing better now, just like Steve mentioned. Supply chains always adapt, and we still make it happen. It doesn't matter what it is, and just relax and sit back and let the supply chain handle it. So I think the executive or people need to put that into perspective. We are not like in the decades ago that we don't have the student or people that graduate in supply chain. We do have it now, and a lot of people put effort into education and all that. So I think just ability to do those kind of things is certainly represent that how much resilient your supply chain is.
I'm really glad you brought up this demand focused supply chain, because essentially we are in supply chain, whether I'm a recruiter or a company, we serve the customer. Right. And in order to serve the customer and deliver the product that the customer needs, we also should be able to substitute this product if we need to. I know you are a big advocate for a supplier diversity, because at some point supply chain was focusing on sole suppliers. So definitely having multiple options and maintaining good relationships with your suppliers is going to secure your supply chain. Because I know supply chain leaders who may be tough on suppliers because right. to get the best deal out of them, but at the same time it violates the relationship part. Suppliers right. are likely to give you heads up about potential issues because they don't like dealing with certain people. They just want to handle everything quietly, and that lack of clarity, lack of that collaborative communication affects the customer service, whether it's a fill rate or delivery on time. That's I'm really glad you brought up the people aspect. I remember back in my day, supply chain people were either coming from engineering background, like yourself, like myself, economics, from various backgrounds. Right now, we have students who study fundamentals of supply chain. That's
right.
That actually brings me to the next question. I speak a lot with students, with supply chain professionals, and the very frequent question, and I'm really glad they have this question: what soft skills can help them grow and succeed in supply chain, on your experience? Because we are also evolving as people. Our companies go through transformations, our supply chain go through transformations, and we go through transformations as people. So what soft skills do you think make people successful in the field, in your opinion?
Me or Steve?
Yeah, Jit, let's start with you, and then Steve.
Okay. Okay.
Steve has military certifications, a very diverse background, definitely.
Right. So for me, before we focus on the skill, I certainly want to make sure that you already know that supply chain is something that you love to do. So because work is a big part in our life, right? So you have to choose something that you enjoy doing it. That way you don't feel like you work, you feel like you sewing puzzle and all that. So I think it's very important to focus on what you like before you focus on the area that you want to. Now, if you find that they have some kind of program out there online. Some of them is even complimentary, is free, that you can take a look at. Is that the area that you really like? Because dealing with manufacturing, dealing with warehouse, logistics, those kind of things as well. So it's certainly good to know that at the area that you enjoy doing it. For me, the skill that you need the most, I would say that you need to have the ability to organize the chaos. You have to have the curiosity mind. You need to have be good with people, because you need to work cross-functional with different departments, and some people, majority of people will not report under you. So you have no authority over them. So you need to be, but together, you need to pull them together, the same common goals. So for me, that is certainly fun, because it's you need to see. I always explain that I see the supply chain like playing the puzzle. If you love puzzle, you certainly would love supply chain, because every elements, every pieces have their own duty and have their own function, and we cannot missing out. And if one thing missing or two things missing, you need to be Sherlock Holmes, try to find it. Many people may not have the big picture supply chain management view like you do, but you know that each element, each piece have their own duty, and it is rely on each other. So those are skills that you really need. And of course, supply chain is always adaptable. So you're going to need to keep learning. You need to love solving problems, and pretty much that is the new technology that would help with the overcome the complexity and all that. You need to familiar yourself as well. And if I need to sum up, supply chain management is certainly business engineer, but then I must be biased, right? Because I came from engineering background and I have the supply chain degree as well. But anyway, what about you, Steve?
Well, I agree with absolutely everything you've said. I would also add Excel, so to really develop advanced or expert level Excel skills. And that's a major gap in my own development. But, the one thing that I have done across all the programs that I've managed is I developed a bespoke master dashboard on Excel to capture every conceivable detail of a process or network. And it's my mental map as much as anything else, and I think armed with this data and the resulting KPIs, you can achieve so much, such as cost reductions, operational efficiencies, and also reduction in conflict within the organization, because that's often born from politics or opinions. But when you show the hard data, that normally, ends the argument and puts it in the right focus. As Jit said, I think you need to be a people person, the ability to develop relationships and negotiate across the organization, across functions and scales, and also with external actors, whether it's suppliers or customers. I think you also have to be comfortable with educating people within the organization. I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but for the most part, there's a lack of supply chain knowledge across the organization and within the senior management teams. And Tatiana, you mentioned about how ineffective it is to always put too much pressure on your collaborative partners, but oftentimes that pressure is coming from top down. But if you were able to respond to the senior team, educate them with the newest trends that are happening in supply chain, they will be more understanding of the landscape that's out there, and realize that oftentimes their demands are just not valid. So from that perspective, I think there needs to be, as well as the external element, you also have the internal mindsets and information flows to manage. Also, visualization. I think that's a key, and it's not one that is easy to achieve. Sometimes you can be very fortunate, as I was in a couple of organizations where I managed end-to-end supply chain, and that enables you to visualize and map the entire supply chain network and have an acute awareness of how your actions impact the rest of the network and indeed across the organization. That's a really good skill set to have. So Jit mentioned getting away from the silo mentality. Yes, we need to do that. It's not always possible for individuals, but if you find yourself within that environment, it's always good to broaden your knowledge and see exactly what's going on across, and every action that you take, how does that impact the rest of the network?
Yeah. I was being curious about other functions within the team, and that exactly comes from when you are passionate about what you do. When you are passionate about serving the end customer, you want to investigate and learn more about the end-to-end supply chain if you are not in charge of the end-to-end supply.
Yeah. Exactly.
To influence without authority. That's actually the very common trend in the industry, as I see, because organizations tend to be flat. There are a lot of individual contributors, and they don't usually have teams under them, but they have to promote their ideas and make those changes by influencing people who technically do not report to them. And that is growing. You mentioned, Steve, you mentioned supply chain trends. A lot of professionals who are in supply chain, they're so consumed by their tactical issues, but by things that they solve on a daily basis. And I often hear from them that they want to know what is going on in the supply chain. Are they missing anything? What are the existing trends? Where can they get that information? Because even though you may be working in supply chain, but you may not have time to explore what's going on, what's trending, so that they can innovate their team. Do you have any trends that you would love to share with our audience? Steve, we can start with you. You just mentioned that.
Yes, I think I'm going to answer this a little bit unorthodox, and I think I'll let Jit answer the major trends that are out there. But for me, what I would love to see or to bring to supply chain management is this collective mindfulness that I was talking about. So, back in 1987, there was a Berkeley group at the University of California, and they formed to study high reliability organizations, such as United States Navy nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, nuclear power plants, and air traffic control systems, to see what factors led them to achieve sustained operational reliability in cannot-fail environments. I don't know if you remember the Top Gun movie, but the USS Enterprise carrier was from that movie. So high reliability theory was born, and later a cognitive infrastructure of collective mindfulness was developed to operationalize the various factors that were found or observed on these carriers or nuclear plants. And there's 5 factors. There's a preoccupation with failure, and that's a collective, relentless suspicion that all potential disruptions that are embedded in the system have not been exhausted or discovered. And as I mentioned earlier, success is feared because it breeds complacency. Then you have a reluctance to simplify interpretation. So in supply chain, we're very keen to develop standard operating procedures. HROs see those as very dangerous because they're based on present rather than future changing conditions. And they stop decision makers from noticing or searching for deviations. Then you have sensitivity to operations, and this is where the top management team comes into play, where they have a big picture overview or observation of performance status. And oftentimes the members of these bubbles, in the Navy they call it having the bubble, they would have expertise in most areas of the system. So in our case, we would have supply chain on the top management team, having situational awareness at all times of what's going on. then one thing that's very unique to them is that they underspecify structures. So this enables decisions to be made outside authority structures by people with accurate specialist expertise, and that's in response to unique situational problems. So anybody from any scale within the organization has the authority to either stop production or to make other decisions if they see a disruptive event unfolding. And then they have a commitment to resilience. And so it's relentless training and simulation of disruptions. And they have almost ghost teams that suddenly appear from across all different functions within the organization, different management structures, but they congregate together to solve a problem in the moment, and then they suddenly disappear then when the danger passes. And what I've done is I've taken this cognitive infrastructure and I've applied it to supply chain resilience in a logistics context. And I have found that all of the elements of supply chain resilience are found within this infrastructure. And what that does is it gives us a functional model, not just in theory, but also in practice, where we have a holistic and collective approach to dealing with supply chain disruption. And I think it's from observations within the military setting, it's in a high reliability organization. It's something that certainly could be brought into the business context. So that's the one trend that I want to talk about, because that's what I want to bring to the business domain. And Jit will have plenty more, I'm sure.
So I think that the trend that people want to know and how to find the knowledge and how to keep up with the trend is a good question, and it also reflects that most people are overwhelmed with day-to-day operation and the tasks that they need to get it done. It's just the job is very demanding and also need to look into the future as well. So I'm glad that they want to do that, and certainly need to pick up and help people in that aspect as well. So you cannot get the blood out of the shrimp or the crab, right? Because it doesn't have one to help each other out. And I would say just keep yourself educated and keep in touch with the people or the friends and that in the industry, and see what they have, and looking from there. And if I can point out which one that is in trend, I would say that we know that because of the lockdown, it's forced us to do more digital transformation. Certainly supply chain analytical and digital supply chains maturing. So a lot of companies pick up that pace, and what would do to the industry as a whole is adopted organization. Gap between the adopted organization and the lagger will be wider with time. If you don't start now, that means that lots of things to pick up. But I would encourage everyone to start where you are and what you have, and always start with know your supply chain inside out. And just as simple as chain is certainly important, because you cannot move things around or be resilient and be flexible if you don't know where things are, right? Or the inventory on hand is actually accurate, like the number that show in your straight system or not. So those kind of things is required us to be more focused, to be more certainly understand your supply chain inside out. And another one is, because of the things that have happened between the country and the lockdown and all that, it's exposed us to see that we need to have the shorter and more diversified supply chains. So this is certainly, I believe that Steve mentioned it before, that the supply chain, I see supply chain as if you compare to the body, right? supply chain is pretty much the muscle, the connect, where the brain and the heart would be, the executive and all that. So what the body needs to do is do what the heart or the brain tell or the will and all that. So it's pretty much the decision and all that made by executive and the supply chain. Oftentimes, just like Steve mentioned, that they will be consulted, and we just do whatever the command or direction or the vision want to do. So for me, when it come to this point, I don't like to see that people blame supply chain, like it's the fault of supply chain that we have less suppliers and all that, because a lot of time the decision making is from the leaders of the organization. So, and excuse me. So a lot of need to be more focused on that point forward. And the social media and the thing that happened going on around, the need for more ethical and transparent supply, that people see more that something may not be right, something may not be appropriate, may not pay the supplier good enough, those kind of things, it certainly can come to the surface. I think it's not only affect the brand performance and the future of growth as well, because the customer good business. So it's good for the business, it's good for the customer, it's good for the world in general. So, and because the organization are struggling to survive, and they try to build a new business model to capture the customer demand, the new customer demand. So what it means to the supply chain profession in general is you're going to need new skill that to know what platform that is suitable for your business, or the customized solution that is fit the need of your organization. And so for me, there is no one size fit all. You need to know your business inside out, and also know your customer as well. So that's the only way to keep customer fulfilled and also grow into the future. And I think we can't deny that sustainable supply is of customer and also the investor as well is also some people might area, but I think in the future it is certainly would look into it. That's what I have for now. Thank you.
These are great points. I also liked when I read your article recently when you suggested adding multiple columns to your master Excel sheet with your current inventory, your in transit. I remember having that Excel master data where I had my on hand, in transit, and future ETAs, what was in transit. So when someone calls me, I can pick up the phone and I have all the information that is accurate and it's in front of me in one Excel worksheet. I remember I invested some time in developing that master file, but it mostly served me as a point of contact, because supply chain also shares this common sense of urgency. Everything is required now. You need to know your numbers. You need to know where you stand. That was really great. And of course, I like that you brought up all those points that we need to anticipate potential disruptions, work on the collaboration, and know exactly what we like in supply chain, our niche, and connect with our friends and learn what they are going through, maintain that relationship aspect of supply chain. Also, I often get, not often, but often enough to ask you about this. People are getting concerned about the security of their jobs because AI kicks in, big data kicks in, and for example, demand planners like, will I be paid less? Will they need one demand planner instead of three? Is my job secure? So do you see any potential risks to certain areas of supply chain? And if you do, then how soon and why?
Well, for me, it's not that people would worry about the job, because job is a big part of life, and it means security in your life and in your family as well. I would say that because of the wave of the new technology that bring in the change. I certainly hope that it will create more opportunity than is damage. So instead of worrying, spending time and energy worrying, I would say put that effort, put that same amount of energy into preparing, earn new skill and see the bright side of the future. We're talking about years before that happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but who knows, right? It's better to be prepared and better to acquire new skill. Now, the many expert, many research said that the job in the future may not be the same job that we have right now. So I'm hoping that everybody will find their way to adapt and earn the new skill and all that. So I certainly positive in that sense. The new entrepreneur, the new business will pick up the pace anyhow, and the traditional business maybe fall off or slow down, and they themselves also try to create new business as well. So it's difficult to find job. I think it's not fair to just blame the business, because they themselves struggling to survive as well. So they need to do whatever it could to keep the most of the people that they can afford it, right? They also need to find a new way to create the business. So I would say it's just it's typical, but what you see the machine or the computer system that they develop into the AI or machine learning and all that, they are good at dealing with large amount of data. Okay, they're good with the big amount of data. With the human brain capacity may not be able to process it fast enough like machine, right? So the big data and all that, they're good at it. But what they lack is the algorithm that make the decision, that make complex decision. Nothing compared to human. Trust me. I believe so. The algorithm is not there yet. Or if so, it would take many years to compare to the human. Even human, we still don't know how we perform all the time. But I would say down to the complex or the complicated decision making, human is still more effective. I see the future of the supply chain management is the person that know the system, understand the complexity, and let the machine help, and you cannot handle. It's time consuming, but the machine do better, and you let them do that, and you are the one who make the decision, get those insights, and you make more informed decision in my opinion. The area that AI and ML would be affect, I would say it in the forecast. Why is that? Because they have the ability to pick up the opinion from social media, from the customer demand, and bring it to our attention, right? That this thing that's happening, this is the trend that they see, and how you're planning into your operation and all that. That's how I see it.
Yeah, that's thank you. Thanks for sharing. That's exactly what I thought. Like, those customer patterns that big data tools can capture potentially. And Steve, what is your perspective on that concern about job security? Because with your background, you have license and military. I mean, you are a tennis coach. Obviously, you keep learning new things. How would you address that concern of people who are worried about the job security and supply chain?
Well, I think Jit might replace me with a robot after this conversation, but I think it's certainly possible, but it's not a sustainable prospect, I would say, because, well, as supply chain networks become increasingly complex, technology is very critical. But supply chain management is a social construction. And as Jit mentioned, networks are living organisms. Humans determine reliability. So I think humans and machines need to coexist. And again, as Jit mentioned, I think that humans are far more effective in decision making where emotion is required. And high reliability organizations mention a lot about stories and unwritten rules, which are nuances that make systems and processes work, and AI is not going to pick up on that. There is one danger as technology becomes ever more complex, humans need to become more complex with that. Okay. So there is a choice. Do you reduce the complexity of technology, which is not something that we can do. Instead, we need to increase human complexity. The way to do that is to introduce something called requisite variety, because humans themselves as individuals are not smart or fast enough to respond to disruptions in hyper-automated environments. And oftentimes, if you're left on your own in a certain situation, you're going to miss information and you're going to provide the wrong diagnosis to a problem, and that magnifies the disruption. So this requisite variety is something that HROs, militaries bring in, where you would have more than one person operating the same technology. In our context, it could be a case of a buddy system. It could be a case of two people, counter checking each other's work. So once if you could be working on two different customer accounts, but there's some kind of crossover between two or more people. And they also look for variety in skill sets, so you were talking about an engineering background for both of you. In HROs, they don't necessarily look for a team of engineers. They look for a team with different backgrounds and different perspectives on situations, and then collectively they come up with solutions. So I think, as Jit said, if it happens, it's going to take many years. And in the meantime, I think it is something that we can gear up to by looking at changing how we do our daily operations. Bringing the concept of overlooking each other as we go through our business. And I think there's a term called fast technology, slow minds, and that's something that organizations need to avoid. I think, like, on a human level, I mean, how often have we dealt with somebody who's run, it could be a supplier or it could be a customer, they've run operations so smoothly, but then when they go on vacation or extended leave, everything falls apart, despite standard operating procedures, despite technologies being in place. So that it's that human element, and people with the right skill sets that we talked about, that they're in the right job for them, that really adds so much more value than the technology or the process itself. So.
Yes, that's a really great point, because that also actually what brought me into recruitment, and that's the value of unicorn experts. I do believe that every single person is talented and will bring the most value if placed in the right leadership environment, in the right industry. And even if potentially someone is at risk of losing a job, you can always explore your strengths, because supply chain background, supply chain is a good school for entrepreneurship. You can definitely, if you can handle supply chain, I'm sure you can handle business as a whole.
Absolutely, yes.
That's why supply chain creates best CEOs, I think. Because I wanted to ask you, I know we are getting close to the time slot that I proposed. What attracts you personally in supply chain, because you both work together as a team as a supply chain advisor? And Steve, congratulations on your recent role as a supply chain advisor. So what keeps you excited about supply chain, your personal perspective on the job that you do? Let's just start with you, because you own the company. I want to hear also your mission.
What we both own it. So what attracts me into the supply chain, it was the work that I did. I was introduced to supply chain management when I was working for Mattel. That was the first time that I exposed into it. Now, I came from engineering background, because at the time there was no supply chain management education and all that. Fell in love with it. It got the right mix. It got the right mix between engineer, between operation management, between people, and variety functions that you need to deal with. I was a part of the training team, and I need to went to other country to got the training and came back to the company and train other people with the team as well. So our team ended up got the highest score among the supply chain, among the material globally. So it was fantastic because you can train the worker at every level, including the shop floor level, that to know the importance of everything you touch have cost in it, and everything, even the thing that you throw away, have cost in it, and how you can keep it at the level that just enough to make it efficient and save costs and all that. So you see the result, and after that, I just implemented in every role that I went to, and people would just like, how did you do that? How did you do all kind of that? Because people may not have the big picture like you do, right? They don't have the end-to-end supply chain management view, and they don't see, you know, how finance, how inventory, how the customer related to one another. They're lacking of that part, and you can apply it into, just like you said, in every business and all that as well. So what keeps me motivated is just like we mentioned, it's about people, and supply chain is, you know, it takes a village to manage it. It gives a sense of community, and I enjoy seeing prosper. You know, the first time that I was helping, you know, some small business in the other area, and I was invited there to give, you know, some kind of comment, and I went there and I walked the exhibition and come up to the stage and give them the recommendation. And you know, your fabric that you made is very good, it's very sturdy, but it's hard to put into the demand in the market. So I tell them, you might be backing with the plastic or PVC to make it stronger, and you might approach, you know, the furniture company, so that, you know, I see that the pattern that you make, it might fit the Japan market and all that. A few months later, they called me and they said, they start from producing it and they're gonna export soon. And after that, I was hooked. It was just so, you know, like it's a good moment to feel that.
That's absolutely,
That's what I see.
Definitely, supply chain gives this sense of it's creativity, because you have your ideas, you implement them, and then you see how those ideas can change the experience customers have. So that definitely has this aspect when you get hooked and you want to do more and more and more, and bigger effort. So Steve, what keeps you motivated, managing director? So what currently is on your plate? What keeps you excited?
I guess I asked myself that very question when I sat down to write the preface for my book, because I honestly had no idea why I had such a passion for supply chain management. When I thought about it, my background is in tennis prior to supply chain, and what I was able to do was match the elements of logistics to a tennis match. The preparation, the changing environmental conditions, constant operational friction, you know, dealing with stressful situations, and the challenge to overcome all of these factors. And that connection explained it for me, at least. What motivates me, you can never know every aspect of supply chain, and there's a drive within us to keep learning and developing. In the early days, I struggled a little bit with the fact that, you know, I thought about people who made things for a living, you know, like a bricklayer building a wall, you know, and I felt that I was going in 9 to 5, what value, what contribution I was making. I was loving what I was doing, but what tangible value was I bringing, you know? And then when I started developing the dashboards, which were in most cases very personal to me, as you mentioned earlier with your master file, that it was for you, that oftentimes the dashboards were outside of the ERP systems, and they were my way of mentally mapping the programs that I was working on. And then gradually that became my wall. You know, I could sit back and see the wall developing with the customer satisfaction metrics. You know, the trend was looking good, or we were seeing you know, cost reductions in other areas, etc., etc. You know, so seeing all of these KPI metrics and working towards that, all of those metrics guiding your actions, you know, your day-to-day actions, that then for me was the tangible value that I could bring, you know, and that's what motivated. But I also love the challenge. You know, I recently undertook a 6-week project to study the impact of Brexit on Irish port movements, and I have quite extensive experience, but I had little or no knowledge of roll-on, roll-off shipments. And so I started with a blank page, and I produced a report that I was very proud of, and I think that was enabled by the proven dashboard approach, and also determination to get the job done for the client. You know, so I mean, passion really, you know, it's underrated, because you might come across something, or you know, a request from a customer, and through secondary or primary data you might find that it's not available to you, but this passion drives you. You know, you can create something. For example, my client was looking for details of customs agents within Ireland. There was no data available anywhere in Ireland. In the UK, sure, there was a database of all of the customs agents, etc. So I created one, and that took a little bit of time, but I ended up with a custom database of 350 companies. You know, so you don't stop; you just keep going. You know, you've got a request from the client, the customer. You want to fulfill that, and it's our drive, it's our passion that makes that happen, you know. And oftentimes it's you can't explain it, you know, but there's such variety, such opportunity in supply chain. It's the perfect profession, really. You know, I've traveled the world many times. You know, you wouldn't get that opportunity in many professions. My son recently followed me into logistics, and he himself can see the opportunities in the profession. They're limitless, and that in itself is a huge attraction for anybody, you know. So, and if you find yourself starting off in something like ocean freight, and you're not too, you know, too enthused by it, there's always other avenues that you can explore. You know, it's limitless. It really is. Yeah, so that's kind of what
Steve, that's actually, while you were explaining it, it also, it sounds very tempting to do something right away, because that's supply chain is the field where you can measure your progress. You can actually see this year versus last year, this month versus the situation that was 2 months ago. And that progress, good or bad, sometimes it gives you the feeling of you own the process, this entrepreneurial approach. When you see, and I get this from both of you, when you see the impact of your involvement, it gives you the sense of fulfillment and, of course, the confidence within your profession. And when a parent is confident and fulfilled, it makes a child to follow his or her steps. And that's a huge achievement of you as a parent, because I think we are also here to inspire our kids. And when your child follows your steps, I think that's amazing. So, and I hope, and the reason I have this conversation is because I want our audience to visualize the success. I want our audience to see people who found their mission, who found their calling, and who are succeeding in it. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, for your contribution, for your time today. I am sure that your insights will help many professionals at different level, whether they are starting their career or they are in the middle of their career, to make certain decisions, get more excited about supply chain, and never give up on themselves.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it. It's very thoughtful questions, and we really appreciate you having us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.